video okay?
I don't see a video. I just see your Tantalus Depths.
Well, dang, hang on. Let me see if I can fix that, because I have a webcam.
You probably have to turn it on the top.
Aha!
There we go.
Landing myself and everyone else. There we go.
There we go. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geek Embassy. This is a spontaneous live hangout with an author from Inkshares, Evan Graham. Say hi. Evan and I have become friends through the book campaign that I'm running on Inkshares right now for my book called Mothering the Game. He's very close, very, very close to completing the full publishing of his book, Tantalus Depths. Yay! I'm so excited about this. His campaign ends on August 16th, so we've got 13 days, 12 days?
13 days.
13 days. 13. It's a good, powerful number, 13, right?
Yeah. Tantalus 13. Planet, so it's my lucky number. I'll get there today.
Yes, it could happen. All right, so you have 87 books left. You need pre-ordered 87 pre-orders. All right, so let's hoping you all, my loving and supportive community, will reach out and help support Evan as well. So why don't we start with, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer, author, human being?
Well, I have been writing in one form or another since I was a really tiny little kid. Like, used to be like, and it was always science fiction and fantasy. Like, from the very beginning, there was never any deliberation on that notion. Like, it started out probably the earliest I can remember as me and my dad. We would write little Star Wars comic books together. Like, he would write them and I would illustrate them, and like eventually I would write and illustrate them. And then eventually I evolved from that into like writing like short little fanfic type stories with like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. And eventually, like in my high school type age range, my dad finally told me, you know, writing Star Wars comic books and stuff like that is good, but why don't you come up with something new, something your own?
Something on your own, right?
Yeah, so then I evolved into sort of writing my own completely original stories, and was still doing the other stuff on the side, but I was also coming up with my own original concepts. And most of them at that point were very derivative and basically just Star Wars with a new skin on it. But I eventually sort of spanned out during my late high school, early college age, and was starting to really write more creatively, more effectively, and to have concepts that were more worth fleshing out and to flesh them out more effectively. And then Tantalus Depths arose from a specific creative writing class I had in college, where my prompt was, it was originally only supposed to be a short story, but the prompt was to write a story from the perspective of someone unlike myself. And that's why I chose to write it about a woman, from a woman's perspective.
Right.
So I did that, and then through the course of the class, it evolved and it expanded, and it became less short story material and more full-length novel material. And over the course of 2 separate classes, because I ended up like having a big old chunk of time in the middle where I should have been writing and I wasn't, but I eventually finished it for a different class, and it became what it is now.
Cool. And how long ago did you finish it then?
I finished it. It was actually my senior project for my writing minor. So I finished it the year I graduated, which I think was 2014. I had a very long, complicated college career, so it's hard to remember exactly.
You're talking to someone who has multiple years of experience in higher education.
Yeah, I basically had just been sitting on it ever since then. Like, I wanted to publish it for a while, but I just kind of didn't. And like every once in a while, I would sort of like peek into what it would take to get published and get intimidated and hide. Because like I went to like this one literary agency, and I was like looking into like submitting something, and then I saw this little line saying, basically, just so you know, we get 500 submissions a week, and we probably won't notice you. So I saw that, and I kind of cried, and then gave up before I even tried sending a query letter.
Yeah, so, I've gone through the same thing about sort of traditional publishing, where it seems like it should be a large community. It's really not.
No.
Traditional publishing is very tight.
And it's getting more so.
It's getting worse.
It's harder for new authors to start in that industry in general. Yeah. That's one of the things I really like about Inkshares, the way it kind of, like, if you're willing to put the work into it, you'll get published no matter who you are or what you've done before.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing I love about it too. And I love how innovative a lot of the ideas are, and how out of the box ideas can be. And if you can get enough people who are like, yeah, I really do want to read this,
right,
you can get it on the shelf. And that's super powerful. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, we've had Kickstarter. Kickstarter isn't necessarily for books. I love that Inkshares is just books. It's just focused on one thing. And I think that makes it a stronger community.
Oh yeah, and I think it's effective too, because like the entire purpose of a literary agent is to guess what people want to read,
right,
and kind of like watch the trends and see what's becoming popular and what's not becoming popular, and like guess, will this book be successful? Will people want to read it? And the way Inkshares does it, they completely nullify that middleman role of the literary agent. I mean, not completely. There's still some quality control that goes on, but it's the idea that it's the readers themselves telling you what they want to see.
Right. They already know they have an audience. Like, they know they have an audience because they've got people who've already said, yes, I want to read this, to the point where they've gone and bought it, and they pre-ordered it. So I think you're right. It does take the guesswork out. It also allows you, I have a friend who is an established author who's like written and published 3 traditional books. And I, messaged him. I'm like, okay, so here's this crazy thing I'm doing. And he went out and checked it out, and he's like, this is kind of cool. And I was like, it is really, different in terms of its approach. But years ago, he told me, when I started looking at doing the podcast after I finished my dissertation, he was saying I could, theoretically turn my dissertation into a popular book if I wanted to. It was going to take a lot of editing, and I'd have to focus on different topics than I did for a dissertation, because truly nobody really wants to read a dissertation.
Yeah, they're kind of meant to not be read.
Exactly. They're meant for a very specific audience and a very specific purpose. And so he's like, you can rework it. And he's like, you already know you have an audience because you've been building this following. And a publisher is going to look at that and is going to be really glad to know you already have people who are interested in it. And Inkshares just kind of took that idea and ran with it.
And again, it's something that's not really like anything else that's out there. Like it doesn't fit into any particular genre. It doesn't have like necessarily an established like way of this is how this kind of book is.
Right.
You're kind of forging new territory.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very fun. So tell us about Tantalus Depths. Tell us about your female protagonist and your character and your story. And I have some other questions I'm going to ask too.
Oh my gosh, where do I start? Like Tantalus Depths it's my kind of love letter to a very specific kind of science fiction. There's so many kinds of science fiction, and I like all of them, but like this is a specific kind of, the main driving influence of it is 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that's pretty obvious from the get-go. But also I have a personal favorite that's not as well known, but it's The Forbidden Planet, which is one of my favorite science fiction movies of all time. And they all kind of have this unifying thread of like this thrill of discovery, of like exploring the unknown and like branching out into the universe like most good science fiction has, but also with this undertone of dread where like maybe we've bitten off more than we can chew. Maybe we're exploring too quickly. Maybe we're not ready for the stuff we're going to find.
Right.
They're not. Like, that's the whole thing, is like there's the awe of exploration, but there's also that danger that you might find something you can't handle.
Right. But there's so much out there that's unknown. Those big questions.
And it's like the story takes place like in in my universe, it's very early on in human exploration. Like, we've discovered fast and light space travel, but we can't have it and artificial gravity at the same time. And we have, like, we've begun colonizing other worlds, but we're still, like, it takes months to get from one to another. So, like, it's not kind of like the Star Trek kind of thing where you have, like, all these civilizations that have, like, created, like, this galaxy spanning network of, like, a society, and you can just jump there back and forth in a day. Like, it's still very early on in interstellar space travel, so there is still so much unknown out there. And
Right.
it's almost kind of like a gold rush kind of a thing where, like, the society is, like, actively trying to claim new territories all over the place, and this is basically like a claim staking mission to Tantalus 13. So they're not even expecting to find anything there. They're just going there to get there. So they're even less prepared to handle what they're experiencing there.
Well, I imagine, and I will fully admit, I am not really a fiction writer. I love fiction. I love to read fiction, but I've never had that capacity to create things that don't exist, which is why, oddly enough, I think I only discovered through the contest that I was a memoir writer. It makes so much more sense to me suddenly. But when I went to enter the contest, I'm like, oh, I can enter this as a memoir, then I can actually write it. But I imagine, like, taking your universe and stepping into that place where space travel is established but not perfected gives you a lot of room as an author to create. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of mistakes that can happen. There's a lot of challenges you can face. Is that true? Is that kind of the case for this?
Oh yeah, like I very intentionally created an unperfected universe. Like, I had this idea of, because I eventually want to have sequels to Tantalus Depths, and I have in mind that it also is like an anthology setting. I want to tell other stories that take place in the same universe but have totally different focuses, totally different groups of characters, take place in a different time frame. But my idea is, this universe, as a rule, the one thing that will bind all these stories together is the fact that it's a universe that is inherently hostile to life. Like, this is a place where, like, humanity, like, at its worst, is still so much better off than the rest of the universe, and we don't know that because we haven't explored yet. And we'll discover that way after it's too late. Right. There's this kind of pessimistic outlook that I kind of want to infiltrate the stories on one level or another, where, like, humanity has been surviving as long as it has out of sheer luck. And I want that to kind of permeate all the stories that take place in the setting. But also, on the other hand, I want to kind of counterbalance that pessimism with optimism, in the same sense where, like, in this story, all kinds of stuff happens that's bad. Like, there's disaster that happens in the story. I'm not spoiling anything. You know it's going to happen from the beginning, that not everything's going to work out for everybody. But at the same time, like, when everything is falling apart and there's just an enormous disaster and there's danger everywhere, you still have, like, your strong female character, Mary Ketch, who is overcoming everything, and that's not by luck. Like, she is so unlucky. Like, everyone in the story is unlucky. She is just as unlucky as everyone else, but she's determined, and she's smart, she's resourceful, she's skillful, and through all that, she manages to build herself up and to escape from this disastrous situation. Which I want to be able to show that just as often as I'm showing everything else. Like, this idea that humanity as a whole is not safe. Like, there's danger everywhere, and, like, at any point in time there could be an enormous catastrophe, but we're not going to give up, and we're still going to get through it.
I think that's an interesting way to take it. It's reminding me a little bit, if I think about one of my favorite series is Firefly. Everybody loves Joss, right? But one of the things that's the most intriguing about Firefly is the fact that there aren't other humans. like in Star Trek, they run into lots of similar life forms. Like they may be green and they may have, you know, tentacles or whatever, but they're still similar enough in a life form. But there's nobody else in the universe in Firefly. It's just humans. Humans some who act good and some who don't, and lots of challenges and difficulties and all kinds of stuff that they kind of go through. And it's kind of reminding me a little bit of that, what you're talking about in terms of humanity perseveres, but in a completely different way than you might have expected. And I love stories like that.
It's definitely in there too, because like at this point in the storyline, like, I mean, spoilers, they end up on a planet that's not a real planet, that was built by an ancient alien civilization. They discover that in the first couple chapters. But up until this point, they've not encountered any trace of intelligent life in the universe. Like humanity, they have discovered life. They've discovered like tiny little microbes here and there. They've discovered like primitive plant life and stuff like that, but nothing that is like the life we have on Earth. And that fact that they've explored so far and they've found nothing is part of the way I build that dread of like, why is it so hard to find other life in this universe? What happened to it?
Right, exactly. Did it exist and it's gone? Did it, you know, extinguish itself in some way? I mean, there's so many different questions you can ask.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that makes for really fascinating world building, as I imagine is part of your responsibility as the author in this.
And I actually don't get into all that much of that stuff in the story. I feel like the story should be pretty well self-contained, but it's like here and there, there's trace references to things like that. But most of this backstory, like world building stuff I've done, it's gonna kind of end up metaphorically on the cutting room floor. It's stuff I know about the universe, and it's stuff that will be consistent as the universe grows. It'll grow along these lines, and you'll see more and more of it as other stories are told. But like for the most part, I wanted Tantalus Depths to be self-contained and easy to jump into, and then when you're done with it, you feel like you've seen an entire story.
Kind of like the way The Hobbit operates in The Lord of the Rings. As that one piece that started all of this other stuff, but still can stand on its own.
You can just read The Hobbit and you won't feel like you missed anything.
Right, exactly. You can just kind of be there. You like that I'm comparing you to Tolkien?
I am so okay with that.
I figured you would be. And Joss Whedon. I mean, come on, I'm giving you some like really big ones we can go to here. So you have a female protagonist, Mary.
Yes.
And what are some of the other characters in your book that stand out?
Well, I intentionally kept it to be a very small cast of characters, like partly because like I'm dealing with themes of isolation and of just the fact that humanity is so small in this place that is so large. So I wanted to keep it a very small cast, and the story is told like entirely from Mary's perspective. It's still not first person narrative, but it's all told from her perspective. So you get inside her head a lot more than you get inside anybody else's. But there's several other characters there. One particular character that I think stands out is the doctor, Ramanathan Bacall. He's kind of a loner in this story. He's like the one member of the crew that Mary really got along with, because most of the rest of the crew annoys her for one reason or another, because like, again, I'm building themes of isolation, so I wanted to make sure that her character always kind of doesn't quite mesh with other characters in the crew. But part of the reason why she does get along with Ramanathan is because he's developed this, over the course of their trip, he's developed this intense depression. Like he's, and I want that to kind of be a part of the dread that develops in the storyline. Their doctor has something wrong with him, and like it's happened since they left. Like he was fine when they started the trip, and by the end of their 6-month journey to Tantalus 13, he's barely functional. He's so manically depressed, and there's nothing anyone could have done about it but him.
Right, so, and that's a dangerous thing. I mean, to be exploring a new world and have a doctor that's gone crazy.
Yeah, and he's not crazy, but he's not 100% all there. Like he's very withdrawn into himself. He's kind of lost his purpose in the story, and I wanted that to kind of be the thing that Mary relates to, because Mary's got a lot of personal issues she's dealing with on the trip as well. She's going on this trip in order to kind of get away from her problems for a while. So she kind of relates with Ramanathan on a certain level. Ramanathan doesn't really get along with anybody else in the crew, and kind of for the same reason she doesn't really bond with anybody else in the crew. But they kind of have a sort of understanding. It's pretty one-sided in the sense that Mary goes out of her way to be nice to Ramanathan and tries to be engaged with him, and he's still very withdrawn. But you do kind of get the idea there's a mutual respect at the very least between the two of them.
Interesting. I love that approach in terms of characters, because I think we have this idea, because so much of science fiction sets up these idealistic communities where people like, and I'm thinking specifically of Star Trek, because I think Star Trek is the most guilty of this, at least the newer Next Generation and beyond, even the original series.
Pretty much all of them.
Yeah, where everybody pretty much respects what everybody else does, their role on the ship and their responsibility. I mean, even if you had, the tension between Kirk and McCoy, or whatever, and they were always so small, and there was always such that feeling of like hope that came out of those series. I really like the idea of kind of flipping that on its head and making it more about isolation, because I think true space travel or space exploration is going to be much more isolating than the kind of this idealized version of Star Trek, which is for a lot of people their main entry into science fiction.
Especially considering, like, in this story, the trip does take 6 months. Like,
right.
They did a lot of research on how actual astronauts interact with each other and stuff like that. But at the same time, this is science has developed to a point where space travel is not as big of a deal. So, like, right now we have astronauts that train for years and years and years, and they're like the best of the best at what they do. But I figure once space travels become more commonplace, it'll kind of relax to the point where they're less astronauts, and they're not even like flight attendants or like aircraft pilots. It's kind of gotten to the point where they're almost more like truckers.
Right.
You don't have to have as much training to do the job. Like, Mary is the pilot on the ship, and she's very well trained and she's very skillful. But everybody else during the trip itself is just a passenger.
Right.
Like, their job happens when they get to Tantalus 13, just like her job kind of ends when they get there.
Right. So for them, it's essentially 6 months of, hanging out and party time and trying to kill time until they get to where they need to be to.
Which, when you have something like that, personalities are going to crash. People are going to develop all kinds of issues with each other and with the mission as a whole. And, like, they'll be professional because they are professionals, but you're not going to have necessarily the same level of camaraderie you might have with an astronaut group or something of that nature. And ultimately, most of the people are there for a paycheck when it comes down to it. So,
well, and they'll have different talents and skills as well, and they won't have trained together. I mean, there's a lot of power that comes from, a group of people who train for the same outcome, as opposed to a bunch of people who you kind of throw together to get to a certain place to have an outcome. That's a completely different thing.
And that's how you kind of have like cliques form. Like, you have Yancey and Rook, who are their mining specialists. They have a pre-existing relationship, so they're always together. You always see the two of them together. They talk all the time. They goof around with each other. They're friends. They're buddies. They get along pretty well with everybody else just because they're both extroverted and everything. But there's a couple of members of the crew that don't really care for them. Like, Mary finds them to be at least somewhat obnoxious. Commander Gorister finds them to be insufferable because he's a ruthless rule monger. He's like he's their boss, and he's very heavily based on bosses I've had who are like, follow the rules to the letter. Like, one of them. And like, so obviously he finds them insufferable.
Right.
They find him insufferable too. And like, you also have Becky and Hertz, who are their scientific specialists. She's the geologist. He's the computer expert. and they kind of click together as well because they're both intellectuals, they're both academics, and they kind of have more in common with each other. So you tend to see Becky and Hertz together, Yancey and Rook together, everybody else kind of off doing their own thing. So it kind of, I tried to figure out how like relationships would evolve naturally in an environment like this, between people like this.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. One of the things I've loved about your campaign has been the visuals you've released.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize until our conversation just now when you said that you were an artist. So you're creating all of that graphics.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I've found that specifically for campaigns like this, like if you can have an image of some kind in your posts, you should, because people will scroll right down past text. Like it doesn't matter how short it is or how long it is, people won't pay attention to it. But if there's a picture, even if it's a picture of text, they'll still be more likely to interact with it just because it's a picture and it's visually stimulating and it stands out. So I actually originally, like one of the reasons why it took me so long to get through college, it took me 9 years to get a 4-year degree because I changed my major so many times, but one of the times I had been a graphic design major. So I know some little ins and outs of how to use Photoshop and Illustrator and stuff like that. And I've tried to make my own material. Like I made my own cover art. I made my own poster. Well, no, my sister actually made my poster. She's a graphic designer too. But I've been trying to crank out consistently visually stimulating media, along with like I've been emphasizing the world building aspect of it, because I think for a story like this, that's important. Like to get the audience you want to be able to hook them in the way they'll be hooked. So for me, if I'm primarily appealing to science fiction fans, I should be showing them that my book has stuff they like. So I've been showing all the different little tidbits, little tiny world building lore things, and inserting art that I've created from like public domain visual assets that I've photoshopped together in ways that are interesting, and as much of that as I possibly can.
Well, having followed countless campaigns now on Inkshares, and looked at, one of the reasons why I did that is to support the community, but another is to look at the different ways people market their books. And yours is outstanding because of those visuals. I haven't seen anybody else take the detail and time and depth and treatment of their characters and their story and their worlds that you've done for it. And I think that really does put your campaign in a different bracket from some of us who are definitely a little more reliant on just words and text to try to get our campaign across.
Well, I think one of the effective ways that people can campaign like this is people should always like play to their own strengths.
Exactly.
Like, whatever it is they're good at doing, they should do. Like I happen to be reasonably competent at using Photoshop and stuff like that, so I've been using it. If I was like, I have a good friend who is really good at making videos and stuff like that, and he put together my trailer for me. But if I was personally really good at that, I'd be doing that. I'd be doing all kinds of video stuff. If I was really good at, I don't know, like making like cartoon type art, I would be doing stuff like that. Like depending on what your personal skill set is, you should always work with that. And I think the way Inkshares does their thing, they give you so much freedom to decide how to run your own campaign. I think there's no one specific right way to do it. It should just be whatever your strengths are, roll with them.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's something that if anybody who, listens to this is thinking about doing something like a crowdfunding campaign or is thinking about running a book on Inkshares, you should think about that. What are your strengths just beyond the book itself to help you communicate the idea and the concept and what you're writing about, because you can get kind of lost in that heavy text, heavy repetition. I've been on a few podcasts and I found myself having to remember which podcast I had said what on, because you start feeling like, didn't I just say that? And then you remember that, oh, right, this is a different show. A lot of issues
like that too. Like I personally feel like I don't want to tell the same thing every time, because I feel like everyone deserves to hear something new and special, but I also can't remember what I've said to everybody. And like, you always have to cover the basics, but you also don't want to give too much away. So
And you have to know you have a different audience each time, so you have to make sure you get the basics covered, but you also want to be, I've been trying to read different excerpts on each show I've been on, so that each one had its unique piece of the book that wasn't necessarily on the Inkshares page, so that they could kind of, say, okay, here's our piece of this, bigger thing. We have this piece of it. So just, work with what you got.
Yeah. It's especially hard to even just to advertise for this book because it's so heavily built on mystery and discovery and stuff like that. So I try not to tell people too much about what happens in it. But at the same time, you have to tell them something because otherwise they're not going to be their interest isn't even going to be piqued. Right.
You have to have enough of a teaser to get people interested in it, but not give too much of it away. Which I think you've done a really good job of that. We discussed that. I think we had a couple of email exchanges when I was asking about like how much should you reveal on Inkshares of your book, and you have to balance between giving enough to get people's interest piqued in your writing, in your book, but not give it away so that they feel like they don't have to buy the book to see the rest of it. And there's kind of a little fine line to kind of dance there with, okay, here's just enough for you to see, here's a little peek, and then shut the door real quick.
It also, I think, helps to identify which specific parts of your story are good selling points, and then to hold other stuff in reserve. Because like one of the things I've been actively kind of playing up in my advertising is the conflict with Scarab being this antagonist, and like people get the idea of evil robot or like unstable robot or rogue robot or whatever you want to call it. They get that idea. They get how it can be scary. They get how it can be interesting. So I'm rolling with that. But the conflict with Scarab is only one conflict. Scarab is an antagonist. It's not necessarily the greatest antagonist in the story, but there's other information that I haven't revealed at all that I'm holding in reserve because like people will be interested by Scarab. They'll be blown away by this other stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I loved about your campaign,
they wouldn't get.
What were you saying?
If I were to just reveal at the front the greater underlying things, it wouldn't have the impact it would have if people came across it organically.
Right, when you come to it during the story itself. Yeah, one of the things I loved was that you had chapter 3 up as your first chapter. And I remember looking at that, and this is really interesting, because now I'm more curious about what's happening in chapter 1 and 2. Jumping to chapter 3 is like your introduction to the world.
I mean, since the first couple of chapters are mostly like expositionary and not that much stuff happens because it's a slow build, I wanted to pick one where it had the best balance between kind of building this intrigue and establishing all this stuff that's going to be important in the rest of the story. So going with chapter 1 wouldn't really do that. Going with chapter 3 was better for that.
Oh, very cool. Well, thank you for all this. If anybody's listening who, like I said, is interested in Inkshares, I think we've given you a lot of insight into crowdfunding for Inkshares. As a last question, Evan, what is your favorite science fiction franchise?
You can't just ask me that.
I knew you were gonna be like, oh God, like really?
See, the problem is like the answer I could give most easily would be Star Wars, because Star Wars
history of it and engagement with it, yeah.
It's not even fair though, because Star Wars is like it's not so much my favorite science fiction story as it is a part of my actual identity. So like it's kind of on a different entire plane of existence than any of the other science fiction stuff that I like. So I don't even necessarily consider it to be science fiction or even fiction. I just consider it to be like a big part of myself.
It just exists.
Like there's that. But I love science fiction. If it's done well, it doesn't matter what genre it is, doesn't matter who wrote it, doesn't matter what it's about, I'll probably love it, like no matter what it is. I'm currently in the process of reading through Rendezvous with Rama again, which was a story by Arthur C. Clarke, and it's very similar in a lot of ways to Tantalus Depths, and that's one of actually reasons why I was reading it, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't ripping it off too much.
Right, like you didn't even think about it because you're just so familiar with the story. It like made its way into your writing.
Yeah, like there's a lot of that in there, and I hadn't even actually read Rendezvous with Rama when I first started writing Tantalus Depths, but my dad suggested it when I told him about it because he was like, "There's similar stuff in there."
Yeah.
It's a really good story, so I'm gonna go with that for now.
Okay. Arthur C. Clarke, awesome. Great. Well, okay, let's see. Where can everybody find you?
Everybody can find me on inkshares.com/books/Tantalus Depths. And I'm on Facebook as well. There's Tantalus Depths has a page on Facebook. There's a YouTube channel for it. I've tried almost everything, but I'm most active on Inkshares and Facebook.
Yeah, those seem to be the two big ones right now. So I will have links to Evan's campaign on Inkshares and to the Facebook page at the very least, probably the YouTube channel as well, on the Geek Embassy, so you can check us out there. Go order. If you ordered my book and you didn't use your $5 credit, you'll have a $5 credit you can use toward Evan's book.
So worth $5.
So worth $5. I have no doubt. And you'll start getting those updates that I was talking about with the graphics and the details of the characters, which have been a delightful addition to his campaign and to the book. So make sure to order up. And thank you for joining us, Evan. It's been a pleasure. And I wish you the best of luck. I'm rooting for you. And thank you for all your support for mothering the game. It's been great. Your help has been, I don't know where I would have been without your help through the campaign and your advice as I was going through.
My pleasure.
So thank you so much.
You're going to get there too.
Yeah.
I know it is.
Yeah, I have 20 some odd days left in my campaign. So if you have not ordered Mothering the Game, please go and order that too. And I'll have the links to that on the Geek Embassy as well. So thanks for listening, and until next time, get your geek on.